Beneath the paws of the Great Sphinx lies a sealed chamber, undisturbed for thousands of years, detected by modern science and officially off-limits. In this episode, we're diving into the mystery beneath the Sphinx, a hidden chamber some people believe may hold lost records, forbidden technology, or evidence of a civilization far older than Egypt itself. Here's the question. If a secret room under the world's most iconic monument held proof of an ancient, advanced society, would we ever be told the truth? Or would it disappear, buried again quietly? Let us know what you think in the comments, and buckle up. This one goes deep. In 1993, a seismic survey at the base of the Great Sphinx revealed something mainstream archaeology still refuses to properly address: a large, symmetrical anomaly beneath its front paws. It wasn't speculation. It was a hard scientific reading, led by geophysicists Thomas DeBakey and John Anthony West, using ground-penetrating radar. The data showed a rectangular hollow, about 9 meters beneath the surface, with clear, right-angle boundaries. In other words, a room, a constructed space, a chamber. The discovery was confirmed in follow-up studies. And yet, for over 30 years, it remains unexcavated. No probes, no robotic surveys, no public exploration. The Egyptian Supreme Council of Antiquities has consistently denied access to this space. Officially, they claim the chamber is natural, but the seismic pattern doesn't match any known geological formation. It matches a man-made cavity. If this were found beneath any random ruin, it would still be monumental. But this isn't any ruin, it's the Sphinx, the oldest surviving monumental sculpture on the planet, still shrouded in mystery. A monument without inscriptions, origin records, or an agreed-upon builder. And beneath it sits a sealed chamber that no one is allowed to open. But why? Some say it's for preservation. Others suggest political control, religious implications, or fear of what might be found. But the fact remains, this is a scientifically validated underground structure beneath one of humanity's most iconic monuments, and it's off-limits. Not forgotten, not overlooked, deliberately ignored. If it were empty, it would have been opened. If it were insignificant, it wouldn't be restricted. Whatever's down there, it matters. And the silence around it speaks louder than any official denial. The Sphinx guards more than just stone. It guards a secret the world still isn't ready to face. Imagine this. Beneath the most enigmatic monument on Earth lies a sealed chamber, confirmed by science, and yet no government, no university, no global institution has ever been allowed to properly excavate it. Not in the 30 years since it was discovered. Not even for non-invasive exploration. Why? Access to the area beneath the Sphinx is tightly controlled by Egypt's Ministry of Antiquities. Since the 1990s, every request to investigate the chamber, whether from independent researchers, international universities, or collaborative archaeological teams, has been denied. No reasons given, just silence, red tape, and shifting excuses. The official narrative labels the cavity as a natural fissure, despite its rectangular shape and consistent dimensions. The data doesn't support that. But still, no digging. Former Minister of Antiquities Zahi Hawass, long considered the gatekeeper of Egyptian heritage sites, has publicly scoffed at any alternative interpretation. He's called suggestions of hidden chambers nonsense, even when faced with hard geophysical evidence. Meanwhile, permits to explore far less significant ruins are granted all the time, often to foreign teams. So what makes this location untouchable? The refusal raises more questions than answers. If there's nothing to hide, why restrict access so aggressively? Why deny the world a chance to explore a chamber that could contain texts, artifacts, or structures untouched for thousands of years? Why block curiosity, especially when the site is already a global symbol of mystery? Skeptics argue that opening the chamber might expose truths that contradict established timelines. Religious, cultural, and academic narratives could unravel. A discovery here could suggest that the Sphinx is not a dynastic monument, but a remnant of something much older, something predating recorded history. And if that's the case, those in power, academic or governmental, have a clear motive to delay, obscure, or to deny access altogether. Because once the chamber is opened, the official story collapses. Sometimes, the refusal to explore says more than the discovery itself. Long before seismic equipment hinted at a hidden chamber beneath the Sphinx, ancient legends already spoke of its existence. The most famous of these is the Hall of Records, a fabled subterranean archive said to hold the lost wisdom of a forgotten civilization. Some say it's the history of Atlantis. Others believe it contains advanced scientific knowledge, spiritual technologies, or records of humanity's true origins, preserved beneath stone for a future generation to uncover. The idea was popularized by American mystic Edgar Cayce, often called the Sleeping Prophet. In a series of trances during the early 20th century, Cayce claimed that survivors of Atlantis fled to Egypt around 10,500 BCE, where they preserved their knowledge in a hidden chamber beneath the Sphinx. According to him, this Hall of Records would be discovered when humanity was ready, and it would change everything we thought we knew about history, science, and even consciousness itself. Mainstream scholars dismiss Cayce's prophecies as pseudoscience. But then came the seismic data. In 1993, the chamber's detection matched Cayce's description in both location and orientation. What had been legend was suddenly tethered to hard evidence. That's when the denials intensified. Access was shut down. Inquiry turned into controversy. And the Hall of Records became a flashpoint in the war between conventional history and forbidden archaeology. Could Cayce have been right? Or was he simply echoing older, now forgotten traditions? Ancient Egyptian texts speak cryptically of a house of life buried beneath the sands, housing sacred scrolls and star knowledge passed down from before the flood. Plato wrote of Atlantis as a technologically advanced society destroyed in a single day and night. Many cultures across the world, from the Dogon of Mali to the Hopi of North America, share eerily similar flood myths and stories of knowledge hidden for a future age. Whether you believe Cayce was prophetic, intuitive, or just lucky, one thing is certain. A chamber exists exactly where the legend placed it. And that fact alone makes this more than myth. Sometimes, myths survive because they're trying to tell us something we've chosen to forget. At first glance, the Great Sphinx seems to fit neatly into Egypt's ancient legacy. Massive, majestic, and unmistakably pharaonic. But look closer, and things start to unravel. The deeper you dig, the more out of place it becomes. From its design, to its orientation, to its scale and lack of inscriptions, everything about the Sphinx quietly defies explanation. Let's start with its alignment. Unlike the pyramids, which are aligned precisely with cardinal points and celestial markers, the Sphinx faces due east. That might seem ordinary until you realize that during the spring equinox, it stares directly at the rising sun. Some researchers suggest this wasn't symbolic, it was functional. An ancient timekeeping mechanism, a solar marker, possibly even part of a greater astrological complex. Then there's the head. Compared to the massive body, it's oddly small, almost comically out of proportion. Most Egyptologists explain this as stylistic, but others argue it's evidence of recarving. The original head, they suggest, may have been a lion, matching the body's feline form and aligning with the constellation Leo around 10,500 BCE. If true, this means the Sphinx could be twice as old as dynastic Egypt and drastically alters our understanding of its builders. Even stranger is what's missing. For a monument this colossal, 73 meters long, 20 meters high, you'd expect royal cartouches, hieroglyphic dedications, builder credits, or ceremonial inscriptions. But there's nothing. Not one pharaoh left a mark. Not one ancient text explains who commissioned it, why it was built, or what it represents. That's not just unusual, it's unheard of. Every other major monument in Egypt is tied to a ruler. Every tomb, every temple, except this one. Some archaeologists suggest the Sphinx may predate writing itself. Others believe it was sacred to a vanished priesthood, built for a purpose later forgotten or deliberately erased. The dynastic Egyptians may have inherited it without fully understanding its origin, giving rise to stories and restoration efforts that only added layers of confusion. In a civilization obsessed with legacy, the silence around the Sphinx is deafening. A monument with no name, no date, and no context, standing alone in the sand like an orphaned relic from a forgotten age. And beneath its gaze, a chamber still sealed, a riddle still unsolved. What if the Great Sphinx isn't just older than the pyramids, but older than Egypt itself? In the 1990s, Boston University geologist Dr. Robert Schoch rocked the academic world by presenting evidence that the Sphinx's body showed clear signs of water erosion, deep vertical fissures, and undulating weathering patterns that couldn't have been caused by mere wind and sand. According to Schoch, the type and depth of this erosion required centuries of sustained rainfall that hasn't touched the Giza Plateau since the end of the last ice age, around 10,000 BC. That single observation shattered the standard timeline. If Schoch is right, then the core structure of the Sphinx predates dynastic Egypt by at least 5,000 years. That's not just a historical footnote, that's a paradigm shift. It means the Sphinx wasn't built by the ancient Egyptians. It was inherited, a relic of a civilization that emerged before writing, before agriculture, before what we officially call history. Mainstream Egyptologists were quick to dismiss Schoch's findings. Critics argued that the erosion could be due to humidity or salt crystallization, but other geologists supported his conclusions. And more importantly, none of the counter-theories fully explain why other monuments from the same period show no similar weathering. The temples, tombs, and mastabas near the Sphinx eroded horizontally by wind. Only the Sphinx enclosure bears the vertical scars of ancient, torrential rain. Schoch wasn't the first to notice it either. Author and researcher John Anthony West had raised the question years earlier, citing the enclosure's unique geology. But until Schoch, a credentialed geologist, put it into the scientific arena, the idea had no traction. Once it did, the backlash was swift. Conferences were shut down. Panel invites rescinded. The evidence wasn't disproven, it was sidelined. Why the resistance? Because if the Sphinx is older than recorded civilization, then the narrative we've taught for generations about human progress, development, and the so-called primitive past collapses. It would mean that before Sumer, before Babylon, before Egypt, there was something else. Something capable of carving a 70-ton limestone sculpture and aligning it with astronomical precision. And if they could do that, what else did they leave behind? A chamber beneath the Sphinx, confirmed by seismic scans, measured, documented, and yet still sealed. So the question isn't whether it's there. The question is what's inside. No one knows for certain, but that hasn't stopped speculation. Some believe it could be a cache of ancient texts, perhaps predating dynastic Egypt. Records of a forgotten epoch, of star knowledge, energy systems, or origin myths that never made it into hieroglyphs. Others think it might hold artifacts from an unknown civilization, tools made of materials we no longer recognize, relics that suggest advanced metallurgy, or even technology that defies what we currently believe ancient people were capable of. One of the most provocative ideas? The chamber might not contain objects at all, but something much stranger. A power source, a vibrational mechanism, a harmonically tuned space meant to interact with the Earth's energy grid. In that view, it's not a storage room, it's a switch, a key, a functional component of a much larger system, perhaps connected to the pyramids, perhaps designed to activate under specific cosmic conditions. Sound far-fetched? Consider this. Other ancient sites around the world, like the underground tunnels of Teotihuacan or the mysterious voids in the Great Pyramid, contain similar sealed chambers, often aligned with astronomical markers and left deliberately untouched. Whatever they were designed for, they weren't built casually. They weren't meant for everyday use. They were protected, hidden. And here's where it gets really strange. According to multiple sources, including former excavation workers and fringe insiders, there have already been unofficial attempts to access the chamber. Quiet drills, late-night digs, military closures. If anything was found, no photos were released. No press conferences, just denial and distraction. If these claims are even half true, It raises the possibility that what lies beneath the Sphinx isn't just unknown. It's been found and reburied. Whether it's a library, a machine, or an empty room, the reality is this: we have the technology to explore it, but we're not. And that alone should make you wonder what kind of truth might be sealed away under the world's most iconic monument. The greatest mystery may not be what's buried there, but why we're not allowed to see it. If there's one name that looms as large as the Sphinx in modern Egyptian archaeology, it's Dr. Zahi Hawass. For decades, he served as Egypt's Supreme Council of Antiquity's most powerful voice. Part gatekeeper, part celebrity, and arguably the most influential figure in controlling access to the nation's ancient sites. And when it comes to the chamber beneath the Sphinx, Hawass's fingerprints are everywhere. He's dismissed claims about the hidden room as nonsense, even when presented with peer-reviewed seismic data. He's labeled critics as fringe theorists, pseudoscientists, or worse, conspiracy nuts. And he's blocked excavation permits for decades, even to credentialed teams. The pattern is clear. Any narrative that veers from official history is shut down hard. In 2006, author Graham Hancock publicly challenged Hawass to acknowledge the chamber's existence during a televised debate. Hawass responded with anger, evasion, and personal attacks, but no data. This wasn't academic disagreement. It was damage control. Because if the chamber does exist, and it's proven to be artificial, it would dismantle Egypt's neatly packaged timeline, along with the global trust that rests on it. Hawass claims his motive is protection, safeguarding Egypt's heritage from looters, amateurs, and speculative theories. But critics point to something else: narrative control. Maintaining Egypt's cultural story, securing tourism funding, and preserving institutional dominance over ancient history. The Sphinx, after all, isn't just a monument. It's a brand. And brands don't tolerate reboots. Some believe the resistance goes deeper, that Hawass and those in his circle may know more than they're revealing. That the secrecy isn't just political, it's protective. Because whatever's beneath the Sphinx could call into question not just Egyptian history, but the entire framework of what we accept as civilization. And yet, for all the dismissal and censorship, the evidence doesn't go away. The seismic scans still exist. The unanswered questions still linger. The permit denials still stand. The louder the gatekeepers shout, the more obvious it becomes. Someone doesn't want us looking beneath the Sphinx. And that's exactly why we should. The chamber beneath the Sphinx isn't unique. In fact, it's part of a strange global pattern. Sealed rooms, buried chambers, and restricted zones hiding in plain sight across the world's most ancient sites. From Mesoamerica to Eastern Europe, the same eerie question keeps surfacing. Why are the world's most mysterious structures consistently hiding something? And why are we rarely allowed to look? Take Teotihuacan, Mexico. Beneath the Temple of the Feathered Serpent, archaeologists discovered a sealed tunnel lined with mercury, strange spheres, and materials with no clear ceremonial purpose. After brief international headlines in 2015, the findings disappeared from public discourse. No final report. No widespread analysis. The tunnel was resealed. Or Mount Busigi in Romania, where whistleblowers and local legends describe a massive, artificially carved chamber discovered in the early 2000s, one allegedly filled with advanced technology, energy signatures, and anomalous inscriptions. The Romanian government allegedly imposed a blackout on all research, with NATO stepping in to restrict access. Skeptical? So were many, until the restricted military perimeter around the site expanded and all excavation work suddenly halted. In Turkey, the underground city of Derinkuyu stretches over 200 feet below ground, with air shafts, schools, and stables. It's large enough to hold 20,000 people. No one knows who built it or why. Excavation continues, but the lower levels remain inaccessible, sealed off to the public with no timeline for further exploration. Even in Egypt itself, the Osirian at Abydos remains a curiosity. Massive granite blocks lie beneath the water table, in a structure far more advanced than anything nearby, and yet it's barely studied. Official tours don't go there. Theories aren't entertained. It's just ignored. What connects all of these sites? Hidden chambers, forbidden access, and a refusal to investigate the anomalies seriously. In every case, the same pattern repeats: an initial discovery, followed by silence or suppression. The official response is always the same: nothing to see here. But maybe that's the point, because if just one of these chambers, just one, contains proof of a pre-Ice Age civilization, lost technology, or a version of human history we've never been taught, then everything changes. Not just for archaeology, but for humanity. And the more sites we find sealed, the clearer it becomes. This isn't a local mystery. It's a global message, buried beneath stone, waiting for us to notice the pattern. Ancient Egypt was obsessed with documentation. Pharaohs etched their victories, prayers, and self-glorification into every available surface. Walls, obelisks, statues, even coffins. Temples were covered in hieroglyphs, tombs adorned with elaborate stories, and monuments stamped with the names of kings desperate to be remembered. And yet, when it comes to the Great Sphinx, the most iconic, most enduring symbol of ancient Egypt, there's silence. Deafening silence. There are no inscriptions on the Sphinx itself, none around its base. No carvings indicating who commissioned it, why it was built, or when. There's not a single cartouche linking it definitively to a specific pharaoh, not even the one most Egyptologists assume: Khafre. That entire association is based on proximity to his pyramid and a heavily eroded stela known as the Dream Stele, erected centuries later by Thutmose IV. Even that inscription is vague, poetic, and open to interpretation. It reads like a myth, not a record. Contrast that with the pyramid texts or the Book of the Dead, both overflowing with symbolic, practical, and ceremonial detail. The Sphinx? A blank. Why? Mainstream scholars chalk it up to erosion or lost documentation. But erosion doesn't erase an entire absence of intent. If Khafre or any pharaoh had commissioned the Sphinx, he would have declared it. He would have carved his legacy into the stone, just as every other ruler did. The alternative explanation is both simpler and more unsettling. The dynastic Egyptians didn't build the Sphinx. They inherited it. They found it, partially buried in sand, already ancient by their standards. They restored it. They revered it. But they didn't understand its origins, and thus had nothing definitive to say about it. Even the ancient texts that do mention the Sphinx, like those from the Edfu Temple, speak in riddles, describing it as a monument built by the gods, or one that appeared from before the time of the pharaohs. It's referenced like a relic from another world, a time before memory. This silent void isn't accidental. It's a clue, a massive, stone-shaped question mark that refuses to explain itself. And in the most hieroglyph-covered civilization in human history, the Sphinx stands mute, not because it has nothing to say, but because no one left alive knew what it was saying. The greatest monument in Egypt may have been built before Egypt existed. What if the ancient Egyptians didn't build the Sphinx at all? What if they merely inherited it from a civilization that rose and fell long before recorded history even began? This idea, once fringe, is gaining traction among independent researchers and even a handful of open-minded scholars. The argument is rooted not just in legend or seismic scans, but in a growing pattern of archaeological anomalies that challenge the conventional timeline of human development. From Göbekli Tepe in Turkey to Gunung Padang in Indonesia, ancient sites are emerging with construction dates that stretch deep into the prehistoric era, some over 10,000 years old. Sophisticated, megalithic, and aligned with the stars, these sites suggest a level of organization, knowledge, and intent that mainstream archaeology still struggles to explain. Göbekli Tepe, for instance, was built around 9,600 BCE, thousands of years before the wheel, agriculture, or writing. Yet its carved T-pillars, astronomical alignments, and symbolic carvings point to a culture not just surviving, but thriving. And then, mysteriously, burying the entire site on purpose. What kind of civilization builds something with that level of effort, only to bury it? This is the puzzle researchers like Graham Hancock, Randall Carlson, and Robert Schoch have pursued for years, that a highly advanced global culture may have existed before the end of the last ice age, only to be wiped out by cataclysm, volcanic eruptions, solar events, or the impact of comet. This is not myth, it's grounded in hard data. The Younger Dryas impact hypothesis, supported by a growing body of geological and astronomical evidence, suggests a sudden global disaster around 10,800 BCE that would have devastated any emerging civilization. If such a civilization existed, Egypt may have been one of its few surviving cultural nodes. The survivors, engineers, astronomers, initiates, could have seeded knowledge in select locations: Egypt, Mesopotamia, Mesoamerica. Over generations, memory faded. Ritual replaced science. Symbol replaced function. But the monuments remained. The Sphinx, then, may not be a product of Egypt's golden age, but its origin story. A fossil of forgotten greatness, preserved in stone long after the blueprint was lost. Mainstream historians scoff at this theory, claiming there's no direct evidence of such a mother civilization. But when you're looking for a culture that predates writing, whose cities may now lie underwater or beneath jungles and deserts, absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. And if even part of this is true, the question shifts from who built the Sphinx to what else did they build? And more importantly, why did it all disappear? Let's confront the physical reality. The body of the Sphinx and its surrounding enclosure were carved directly into the limestone bedrock. Some of the blocks extracted during this process weigh over 200 tons. They weren't just removed, they were relocated and repurposed for nearby temples like the Valley Temple of Khafre. These are among the largest single blocks ever handled in the ancient world. And yet, according to Orthodox archaeology, this was accomplished with copper chisels and stone pounders. That explanation simply doesn't hold up under scrutiny. Try carving a granite statue with copper, and you'll see the problem immediately. Copper is far too soft to cut dense stone efficiently, let alone shape it with millimeter precision. Experimental archaeology has repeatedly failed to replicate the cuts and finishes found on these ancient monuments using period-accurate tools. The striations, boreholes, and flat faces found on megaliths around the Sphinx and nearby structures like the Valley Temple suggest something else, something that behaved like high-powered saws or drills. So what do they use? Some researchers have proposed lost machining technologies, possibly involving sound or vibration, a kind of sonic tool theory. Others suggest simple but forgotten techniques leveraging water pressure, concentrated sunlight, or rotating abrasive discs. More fringe hypotheses even hint at anti-gravity devices or field manipulation tools passed down from an advanced lost civilization. No, these theories haven't been confirmed in labs. But the truth is, neither has the copper chisel theory, because it simply doesn't work when scaled to the size of the Sphinx project. The mystery isn't that we don't know what tools were used. It's that the tools we've been told were used provably weren't up to the task. And then there's the question of precision. The symmetry of the Sphinx, its alignment with the cardinal directions, and the shaping of the enclosure all suggest architectural planning and surveying skills beyond what ancient Egyptians are credited with in that era. These aren't crude sculptures. They are sophisticated works of geoengineering. Which leaves us with a dilemma. Either history is wrong about the tools and methods available at the time, or the timeline is wrong, and this monument belongs to a forgotten epoch altogether. In either case, the accepted story doesn't add up. And when the physical evidence contradicts the written narrative, it's the narrative, not the stone, that needs rewriting. We picture the ancient Egyptians dragging stone blocks across scorching desert sands, using wooden sleds and raw manpower. That's the image Hollywood gave us, and it's the one still promoted in textbooks. But new evidence suggests something far more sophisticated, a hidden system of canals, engineered specifically to transport materials to Giza. Not fantasy, fact. In 2013, archaeologists uncovered the Wadi al-Jarf papyri, a set of ancient administrative documents dating to the reign of Khufu, the very pharaoh supposedly responsible for the Great Pyramid. One scroll, written by an overseer named Mirror, describes in surprising detail how limestone was ferried from the Tura quarries to the Giza Plateau via a network of canals and boats. The implication? Massive water-based infrastructure once crisscrossed the area: canals, harbors, and sluice systems, most of which are now buried under sand or urban development. Satellite imagery backs this up. Subtle topographical anomalies hint at man-made channels that once ran between the Nile and the pyramid complex. These weren't random rivers. They were engineered arteries designed to carry multi-ton stone blocks with precision and timing. Seasonal flooding of the Nile may have even been leveraged to activate and deactivate these canals, forming an adaptive supply chain system. But here's where the story gets stranger. This level of hydraulic planning wasn't just practical, it was remarkably advanced. It required surveying skills, hydrodynamics knowledge, and coordination on a scale that suggests central planning well beyond Khufu's reign. Some researchers suggest that Egypt's canal system may have been inherited, either from an earlier dynastic phase or from a much older civilization whose infrastructural genius was simply repurposed. Consider this. The Valley Temple and Sphinx Temple are constructed from 200-ton blocks, placed with laser-like precision. How did they arrive there? Dragging them would have torn up the ground and left clear evidence of ramps, none of which have been conclusively found. Floating them down waterways, on the other hand, would have made the task easier, faster, and far more feasible. And yet, despite mounting evidence, mainstream Egyptology rarely acknowledges the full implications of these logistics. Because once you admit there were ancient harbors, complex sluices, and transport systems long buried beneath Giza, you open the door to something else. That what we think of as ancient ingenuity may actually be ancient memory, echoes of a technology and infrastructure far older than dynastic Egypt. A civilization that not only moved stone, but knew how to move it with water. Efficiently, elegantly, intentionally. You've probably heard that the Great Pyramid encodes the value of pi, maybe even the golden ratio. But what if that mathematical sophistication wasn't limited to the pyramid? What if the entire Giza Plateau, including the Sphinx, was constructed as a vast, multidimensional message? Let's start with the numbers. The ratio of the Great Pyramid's perimeter to its height equals approximately 2 pi. Its base angles mirror those of a perfect golden triangle. The King's Chamber reflects the geometry of the Earth itself. But less often discussed is how these proportions extend outward to the Sphinx, the causeways, and surrounding temples. The alignment between the Sphinx and the pyramids forms a near-perfect east-west axis, matching solar equinox points. The entire layout functions like a giant calendar or a map. Researchers like Robert Bauval and Graham Hancock have long argued that the Giza monuments mirror the stars of Orion's belt as they appeared around 10,500 BCE. The Sphinx, facing due east, watches the rising sun on the spring equinox, while the pyramids align with celestial bodies in a way that suggests an ancient obsession with as above, so below. This wasn't superstition. It was science, encoded in architecture. Now ask yourself, how do they know this? These aren't simple alignments. They require precise knowledge of Earth's axial tilt, precession of the equinoxes, and the movement of stars across thousands of years. In modern times, we only confirmed these astronomical cycles with high-powered telescopes and computers. Yet somehow, ancient builders embedded this information in stone, with no known instruments. One explanation is that this knowledge came from centuries, perhaps millennia, of skywatching and oral tradition. Another? That it was inherited, preserved by a priesthood that understood not just geometry and astronomy, but a kind of unified science where architecture, sound, vibration, and consciousness were deeply intertwined. In this view, the Sphinx wasn't just a statue. It was a marker, the literal guardian of knowledge, a sentinel placed at the edge of a once thriving civilization to preserve truth through flood, fire, and forgetfulness. Its design, its orientation, and its silence were all intentional. Not broken, not eroded, just encrypted. And today, as we rediscover the math hidden in stone, we're not advancing, we're remembering. Because the Sphinx may not just be a monument to the past. It might be a key to something timeless. We've been told the Sphinx is a statue, nothing more than a colossal guardian carved by order of Pharaoh Khafre, symbolizing his divine authority and protection over the necropolis at Giza. But that explanation raises more questions than it answers. If it's just a statue, why align it precisely to the rising sun on the spring equinox? Why construct it out of bedrock using engineering methods so mysterious they still baffle modern experts? Why guard it with silence? More importantly, what if the Sphinx wasn't just a sculpture at all? Some researchers believe the Sphinx was part of a larger system, an integrated component in a complex of ancient energy or resonance technology. The narrow shafts inside the Great Pyramid, the unexplored voids detected with muon scans, the chamber beneath the Sphinx. None of these features point toward mere symbolism. They suggest function. One theory suggests the Sphinx was once part of a harmonic machine, perhaps a vibrational instrument designed to interact with the Earth's natural energy fields. Others posit it served as a time marker, a lion-bodied sentinel position to mark the age of Leo, around 10,500 BCE, when it would have faced its celestial counterpart on the horizon. That would place its original construction at the very beginning of the Younger Dryas period, just before a global cataclysm reset the timeline of human civilization. But here's where it gets even stranger. There is geological evidence that the head of the Sphinx is not original, that it was recarved. The body is disproportionately massive compared to the small, oddly shaped head. Its style doesn't match the rest. Egyptologist R.A. Schwaller-de-Lubicz and others noted this anomaly decades ago, suggesting that the original head may have been something else entirely, perhaps a lion, in line with its zodiacal alignment, or even something symbolic we no longer understand. If that's true, it means the Sphinx has been modified, reinterpreted by later dynasties who no longer remembered its true purpose. That would make the Sphinx not just old, but ancient beyond memory. Why does it matter? Because if the Sphinx was never meant to be a pharaonic monument, then we've misunderstood one of the most important artifacts on Earth. Its design, its function, and its silence may all point to something we've yet to comprehend. A forgotten science, a pre-cataclysmic civilization, or a spiritual technology encoded in stone. A guardian doesn't just defend, it protects a secret. And whatever the Sphinx was built to guard, it's still guarding it. It's one thing to admit there are mysteries left to solve. It's another to recognize that some mysteries might be actively hidden. In the case of the Sphinx, and ancient history at large, many researchers now believe we're not just missing data. We're being denied it. Take the chamber beneath the Sphinx. Despite seismic evidence from multiple independent studies, access has been blocked for decades. Excavation permits are denied. Public interest is deflected with vague statements and red tape. Egypt's Supreme Council of Antiquities, under the long tenure of Zahi Hawass, has repeatedly labeled these investigations as nonsense while refusing to test them. Is it scientific caution or narrative control? The answer may lie in how academia and archaeology really function. University departments, research grants, and national heritage authorities rely on stability. If a single discovery were to seriously challenge the official timeline, say, an inscription inside the Sphinx chamber proving it was built in 10,500 BC, it wouldn't just change Egyptian history. It would collapse a carefully constructed intellectual economy. Reputations, funding, textbooks, museum exhibits. Entire careers have been built on the existing narrative, which means anything that doesn't fit is quietly filtered out, not through sinister conspiracies, but through something more mundane, professional risk. Even in the 1990s, when geologist Robert Schoch presented compelling erosion data suggesting the Sphinx was far older than Khafre's reign, he was met with ridicule, not refutation. His conclusions were ignored not because they lacked merit, but because they disrupted the model. And models, once entrenched, defend themselves. Then there are the whispered accounts, claims by former researchers and insiders that anomalies have been discovered, logged, and buried in archives. That evidence of tools, symbols, or chambers has been quietly sealed off or removed. That international teams have been pulled from digs the moment their findings turned inconvenient. That contracts are signed, NDAs enforced, and silence purchased. Some will say this is conspiracy talk, but history shows otherwise. Remember how Heinrich Schliemann was mocked for believing in Troy until he found it, or how the Dead Sea Scrolls were locked in academic purgatory for decades before being released to the public. Suppression isn't rare. It's institutional inertia, protecting what's known from what's possible. The greatest discoveries often don't fail because they're false. They fail because they're uncomfortable, because they demand that we change not only our textbooks, but our sense of identity, origin, and purpose. So when someone tells you, there's nothing under the Sphinx, ask them this. Then why won't they let us look? The Sphinx may be thousands of years old, but the next breakthrough in understanding it won't come from a pickaxe. It'll come from a server. In a quiet revolution happening behind the scenes, artificial intelligence, ground-penetrating radar, satellite imaging, and muon tomography are beginning to reveal what centuries of digging never could. And some of the results are already raising eyebrows. AI has already been used to reanalyze ancient texts once thought indecipherable. Neural networks trained on hieroglyphic patterns are reconstructing damaged stele, revealing names and stories that have been lost for millennia. Algorithms are mapping subterranean voids and predicting where undiscovered chambers may lie beneath Giza, including under the Sphinx itself. These aren't speculative claims. They're tools now being actively used by academic and independent teams alike. In 2017, a team using muon scanning technology discovered a massive void inside the Great Pyramid, above the Grand Gallery, completely unexpected and still unexplored. The same scanning techniques have identified irregularities beneath the Sphinx's paws and body. Seismic data from earlier expeditions in the 1990s already suggested the presence of a chamber. But now, we can see where and how deep it might be. The evidence is compounding. But here's the twist. Technology may be advancing faster than institutions can suppress what it finds. Private researchers are now using drones equipped with LiDAR and infrared to scan ancient sites from the air. Satellite platforms like Google Earth are revealing topographical anomalies previously hidden by terrain. Independent labs are simulating ancient construction techniques using physics engines and 3D modeling. These aren't fringe operations anymore. They're just outside the official gatekeeper's reach. And therein lies the tension. As data becomes harder to control, the old narrative becomes harder to maintain. The same institutions that once dictated history from ivory towers are now scrambling to keep up with findings uploaded to open-source platforms and analyzed in real time by digital sleuths, coders, and rogue academics. What happens if someone outside the system uncovers definitive proof that rewrites everything? A scan of the Sphinx showing artificial structures deeper than expected? An AI-decoded papyrus revealing that the Sphinx predates dynastic Egypt by thousands of years? That kind of evidence wouldn't just challenge authority, it would bypass it entirely. We're entering an era where the past is no longer owned by a few. It's being reassembled by many. And as ancient secrets meet modern algorithms, the guardians of official history are starting to sweat. The truth may not come from within the chamber beneath the Sphinx. It might come from the code in a laptop above it. At face value, the Sphinx is a sculpture, a human head atop a lion's body, carved from a single limestone ridge. But the deeper you study it, its proportions, placement, orientation, and enigma, the more it refuses to behave like simple art. The more it begins to look like something else entirely. Some believe the Sphinx wasn't merely built to honor a pharaoh or to guard tombs. It was built as a marker, a multidimensional monument encoded with cosmic knowledge, geological time, and spiritual memory. Its eastward gaze toward the rising sun isn't accidental. Every spring equinox, the sun aligns perfectly with its line of sight. Its lion body, when placed against the zodiacal cycle, points directly to the constellation Leo as it appeared over 12,000 years ago. Around 10,500 BCE, the date echoed in dozens of pre-dynastic anomalies. But what if its purpose was more than astronomical? In ancient Egypt, knowledge wasn't divided like it is today. Geometry, astronomy, myth, medicine, and architecture were all seen as part of a singular, sacred science. The Sphinx, in this context, may have been constructed not just to last, but to communicate, not through language, but through geometry, alignment, proportion, and resonance. To those who knew how to read such monuments, it may have spoken volumes. Mystery schools throughout history believed certain structures could act as energy amplifiers, designed to harmonize with the Earth's frequencies, to awaken consciousness, or to preserve vibrational knowledge. If the Sphinx was part of such a system, then its silence isn't a lack of meaning. It's a form of communication that bypasses logic and speaks to something older. Intuition, myth, memory. That would explain why it stirs people across cultures and centuries. Why it appears in dreams. Why it keeps pulling explorers, mystics, scientists, and skeptics back to its side. Because it's not just a riddle in stone. It is the riddle. And maybe, just maybe, the act of trying to solve it is part of the design. The Sphinx may not be waiting to tell us its secret. It may be waiting for us to remember it. We end where so many theories begin, between the Sphinx's paws. It's here, directly between the outstretched forelegs of this ancient guardian, that something truly strange was recorded. In 1817, explorer Giovanni Battista Caviglia excavated the space and uncovered the now famous Dream Stele, a granite slab inscribed with a cryptic story. Placed there by Pharaoh Thutmose for over 3,000 years ago, it describes a divine vision. The Sphinx spoke to the young prince in a dream, promising him kingship if he would uncover and restore its buried body. That's right, the Sphinx spoke, and asked to be freed from the sands. Whether literal or allegorical, the stele itself is deeply suggestive. It hints at a pre-existing reverence for the monument, even in ancient times. The story doesn't describe building the Sphinx. It assumes it was already there, old, buried, mysterious, and powerful. Even Thutmose doesn't claim to have made it. He merely reveals it. And just behind that same stele, ground-penetrating radar and seismic testing, most notably in the 1990s by Thomas DeBecke and John Anthony West, detected a rectangular chamber beneath the paws. The dimensions? Approximately 12 by 9 meters. Hollow, undisturbed, inaccessible. Egyptian authorities deny the existence of anything significant there. And yet, no official excavation has ever been approved. The chamber has never been entered. Not by archaeologists. Not by robots. Not by anyone we know of. Why? If it's empty, there's nothing to lose. But if it's not, if it contains something like the fabled Hall of Records, a legendary archive of forgotten knowledge, then everything changes. That single space could overturn centuries of carefully curated history. Not just for Egypt, but for human civilization. Because what lies beneath the Sphinx is more than just a mystery. It's a lit fuse. And so it waits, buried beneath paws of stone, hidden under layers of time, denial, and bureaucracy, until someone, someday, decides to open the final door. And once that happens, history won't just be rewritten. It will have to be remembered. We've chased weathered stone and whispered myths, decoded forgotten geometry, and stared straight into the eyes of a monument that's outlived empires. And still, the Sphinx keeps its silence. Beneath the sand, behind the stories, and under centuries of guarded history, it watches and waits. But maybe it was never meant to give answers, only to provoke the right questions. Because if even one theory is true, if even one door under the Sphinx opens to something we weren't supposed to find, then history isn't what we've been told. It's what we've been protected from. More secrets are buried all around us, and we're just getting started. Subscribe for more deep dives into the world's oldest enigmas. Like if you're ready to keep pulling the thread. And stay tuned for the next mystery waiting to be unsealed.